The early morning sun cast a golden hue over the rolling fields surrounding Mike Grayson's small farmhouse. The sound of birds chirping and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees made it easy to forget the chaos of the world beyond. For Mike, a retired Army Ranger, this quiet life was the solace he had sought after years of grueling deployments. Yet, even in this peace, he wasn't truly alone. His loyal companion, Shadow, was always by his side. Shadow wasn't just a dog, he was a brother in arms. A German shepherd with piercing amber eyes, Shadow had served alongside Mike in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Together, they had faced danger, saved lives, and formed a bond forged in the fires of combat. Now, in retirement, they found comfort in each other's presence, whether it was during long walks in the countryside or quiet evenings on the porch. This particular morning, as Mike prepared for a routine trip into town for supplies, Shadow was as vigilant as ever. He trotted around the yard, sniffing the perimeter and ensuring their territory was secure. "All right, buddy, I'll be back soon," Mike said, ruffling Shadow's fur before climbing into his truck. Shadow barked once, a sound of acknowledgement and trust. But when Mike returned that afternoon, the peace of his home had been shattered. The gate to the yard was ajar, swinging ominously in the breeze. Shadow was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as Mike called out, his voice echoing through the property. "Shadow, here, boy!" Silence. Mike's pulse quickened as he scanned the area, his sharp eyes catching the unmistakable signs of a struggle: trampled grass, broken fencing, and, most damning of all, the fresh tire tracks leading away from the property. He hurried to check the security cameras he had installed, a habit born of his military training. The footage confirmed his worst fears. A group of bikers, clad in leather jackets emblazoned with the emblem of the Iron Fangs, had stormed his property. They had taken Shadow, loading him into the back of a van before speeding off, their laughter audible even through the grainy audio. Mike's hands clenched into fists as rage and determination coursed through him. Shadow wasn't just a pet, he was family, and the Iron Fangs had made the gravest mistake of their lives. Mike didn't know why they had taken Shadow, but he knew one thing for certain: he would stop at nothing to bring him home. Mike stood in his living room, the grainy footage from his security camera replaying on the small screen. Every time he watched Shadow being taken, his jaw tightened. The bikers had underestimated him, mistaking his quiet life for weakness. But Mike Grayson was no ordinary man. They had taken his dog, his partner, his family, and that was a line they should never have crossed. Gathering information. The first step was to identify where the Iron Fangs operated. Mike reached out to an old contact, Pete Harris, a former detective who owed him a favor from a long-past mission overseas. Pete listened intently as Mike explained what had happened, his tone growing serious. "The Iron Fangs run a dogfighting ring out of an old warehouse," Pete said, lowering his voice. "They're nasty pieces of work, Mike. They deal in drugs, illegal weapons, and they don't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way." Mike's grip tightened around the phone. "Where's the warehouse?" Pete hesitated. "It's on the outskirts of the city off Route 49. But Mike, you're not a cop anymore. These guys are dangerous." Mike's voice was cold, resolute. "So am I." Tracking the Iron Fangs. Mike spent the next day preparing. He pulled his old military gear from storage, fatigues, boots, and a tactical vest that had seen countless missions. He checked his weapons, ensuring they were clean and operational. As he worked, memories of Shadow flooded his mind. The way the dog had alerted him to danger, saved his life on more than one occasion, and comforted him in moments of despair. Shadow had been his partner through it all, and now it was Mike's turn to save him. Under the cover of darkness, Mike drove toward the warehouse, parking his truck a mile away to avoid detection. Armed with a pair of binoculars, he observed the compound from a distance. The bikers had set up a crude perimeter with guards stationed at key points, their motorcycles parked in a row like trophies. From his vantage point, Mike could see cages stacked inside the warehouse. His stomach turned as he spotted several dogs, their whimpers audible even from his position. Shadow wasn't visible, but Mike's gut told him he was there, and if he wasn't, these bikers were still going to pay for what they had done. The first strike. Mike didn't rush in. He had learned in the military that patience and planning saved lives. Over the next 2 days, he conducted surveillance, mapping the gang's movements and routines. He noted when the guards switched shifts, where the weak points in their defenses were, and how many men seemed to be inside at any given time. On the third night, he made his move. Using the shadows as cover, Mike slipped through a gap in the fence, his movements silent and precise. He approached the first guard, a burly man smoking a cigarette near the entrance, and incapacitated him with a chokehold before dragging him into the bushes. He moved on to the next, systematically taking out the outer defenses without raising the alarm. Once inside the perimeter, Mike set small explosives on their motorcycles. He wasn't aiming to kill, yet. These were distractions, meant to create chaos and draw the bikers out of the warehouse. At exactly midnight, the explosives detonated. The sound of shattering metal and roaring flames filled the air as the bikers rushed outside, shouting and scrambling to assess the damage. In the confusion, Mike slipped inside the warehouse. Reuniting with Shadow. The sight inside the warehouse sickened him. Dozens of dogs, their ribs visible from malnourishment, were locked in filthy cages. Some growled weakly, while others whined in fear. Mike scanned the rows of cages, his heart racing as he searched for Shadow. "Shadow!" he called out in a low, urgent tone. A familiar bark answered him from the far corner of the room. Mike sprinted to the cage, his breath catching as he saw Shadow. The dog's fur was matted, and his body bore signs of rough treatment, but his eyes lit up with recognition. "I'm here, boy," Mike said, kneeling by the cage. Shadow wagged his tail weakly, letting out a low, relieved whine. Mike picked the lock with practiced ease, opening the door and letting Shadow out. The German Shepherd stumbled at first, but Mike caught him, steadying him. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice firm. Shadow licked his hand, as if to say he was ready. The gang's counterattack. As Mike prepared to leave, the bikers began returning to the warehouse, their shouts growing louder as they realized someone had breached their stronghold. Mike and Shadow moved quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding detection. But the gang's leader, Rex Ironjaw Dalton, spotted them as they reached the back exit. "There!" Rex roared, pointing at Mike. "Get him!" The bikers charged, but Mike was ready. He pulled a smoke grenade from his vest, tossing it into the center of the room. The warehouse filled with thick, choking smoke, creating chaos. Shadow stayed close to Mike's side, following his commands as they navigated through the confusion. One of the bikers lunged at Mike with a crowbar, but Mike countered with a swift kick to the man's knee, sending him crashing to the ground. Another swung a chain at Shadow, but the dog, despite his weakened state, dodged and barked ferociously, intimidating the attacker. The duo fought their way out, using teamwork honed from years of partnership. Mike took down one biker after another with calculated strikes, while Shadow protected his flank, biting and snarling at anyone who got too close. A tactical retreat. As the chaos reached its peak, Mike and Shadow reached the truck. Mike opened the door, helping Shadow into the passenger seat before climbing in himself. The bikers, realizing they were losing control, tried to block the exit, but Mike floored the gas pedal, barreling through their makeshift barricade. Bullets pinged off the truck's exterior as they sped down the road, but Mike didn't flinch. His focus was on getting Shadow to safety. The bikers gave chase on their motorcycles, their headlights glowing menacingly in the rearview mirror. But Mike had planned for this. He reached into the passenger seat, pulling out a detonator. "This is for Shadow," he muttered, pressing the button. Behind them, a series of explosions rocked the road as the traps he had set earlier detonated, sending the bikers scattering. By the time the dust settled, Mike and Shadow were miles away, safe and free. The warehouse was in ruins, the gang's operations crippled, and Shadow was back where he belonged. The sun was beginning to rise as Mike pulled into his farmhouse driveway. The quiet countryside seemed almost surreal after the chaos of the night before. He parked the truck, turned off the engine, and turned to Shadow, who was curled up in the passenger seat. Despite the exhaustion evident in the dog's posture, Shadow perked up when Mike scratched behind his ears. "Home, buddy," Mike said softly. Shadow let out a tired but content bark, wagging his tail weakly. Mike carefully lifted him out of the truck and carried him into the house, setting him gently on a soft bed in the corner of the living room. He knelt beside his partner, inspecting Shadow's injuries. Nothing appeared too serious. Scratches, a few bruises, and a deep weariness that would fade with rest. "I told you I'd get you back," Mike whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Shadow licked his hand, his eyes conveying a trust that no words could match. Justice for Shadow. Mike wasn't the type to leave loose ends. After ensuring Shadow was comfortable, he placed a call to his old friend, Pete Harris, the retired detective. Pete had already heard about the commotion at the warehouse and the explosions that had left the Iron Fang scrambling to regroup. "They're done, Mike," Pete assured him. "The police raided the site early this morning. Dogs were rescued, evidence collected, and with the damage you caused, those bikers won't be back in business anytime soon." Mike exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. "Good. They deserved worse, but I'll take it." Pete chuckled. "You've got your dog back, and the law will handle the rest. Time to let it go, Mike." Mike glanced over at Shadow, who was now sleeping peacefully. "I already have." A new chapter. Over the next few days, Mike focused on Shadow's recovery. The German Shepherd's spirit returned quickly, his energy picking up with each passing day. Soon, Shadow was back to patrolling the property with his usual vigilance, his loyalty unwavering. The townspeople, hearing of Mike's actions, began to view him with a quiet reverence. Though he never sought recognition, his courage and determination inspired the community to stand against injustice, no matter how daunting the foe. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mike sat on the porch with Shadow lying beside him. The warm breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, and the only sound was the rustling of the trees. "You're a fighter, Shadow," Mike said, his hand resting on the dog's back. "And as long as I'm around, no one will ever take you away again." Shadow wagged his tail, his eyes closing in contentment. Together, man and dog shared a bond that no biker gang, or anyone else, could ever break. They were more than a team. They were family.